Well, hello there, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the new and improved for 2025, the Nerd Corner podcast. That is right. Obviously, I didn't really make an announcement or anything for it, so I'm going to talk about it a little bit now. Obviously, there's been a little bit of a hiatus with the Rogue Squadron podcast the last couple of weeks just because of the holidays and, just kind of like the hustle and bustle of the holiday season and the end of 2024. With that being said, I was doing some thinking. I wanted to kind of figure out how to bring this podcast into 2025 and how to continue to improve upon it. And what better way than rebranding it? I mean, obviously, I rebranded it from Two Sons Podcast, which is the podcast that me and my brother started together. And I rebranded it to Rogue Squadron, but it still had familiar elements of Two Sons Podcast. And I really want to start to shift away from the bread and butter of Two Sons Podcast and bring you a whole new and improved podcast while also honoring, the legacies that got us started, obviously. So, obviously, Two Sons Podcast is the backbone of this podcast and will continue to be the backbone of this podcast, but I wanted to make something a little bit more independent, a little bit more unique. So after doing some thinking, I thought I would officially rebrand again for the 2025 season. And what better way to have a whole new name and a new message and a new theme. So this podcast going forward will be called the Nerd Corner Podcast, a little corner of paradise for all you nerds and nerdettes to stop by each week and just listen to me ramble about different TV shows, movies, just things that I'm interested in, and just kind of going over how they did in the movies, or how they did with their ratings and just kind of going over some pros and cons and, just some of the stuff that you guys have seen the last couple of weeks in regards to this podcast. So really nothing is going to change with the format, but just, kind of like the name and the rebranding is what is going to change, obviously. So again, the socials are going to stay the same instead of just obviously Rogue Squadron. They are going to be the Nerd Corner. So basically, if you're already following us on Instagram or TikTok, nothing has changed. If you're already following us on YouTube, again, nothing has changed. There are a couple things that, I do want to try to strive for in the new year, maybe better social media posting, and just trying to get the podcast out there, in the broader network. But again, those will happen with time. I would like to kind of figure out maybe how to do something on either Apple Podcasts or Spotify myself. My brother always handled that part of the podcast, so I never really knew how to do that. But if you guys prefer to listen to, an audio version of it instead of like, watching a video of it, hopefully that is something that I could try to do. But for now, because it is early in the new year, we're just going to kind of take things slow. I am planning a trip to Florida, in the middle of January. So I'm just going to try to get a couple of episodes pre-recorded for you guys to kind of last, that time that I'm in Florida and just to stay consistent with the podcast. But now that I got all that mumbo jumbo out of the way, hopefully, the rest of your 2024 and the holiday season was good for all of you and your loved ones and family. As you, remembered and reflected on 2024 and you made some resolutions for 2025, and hopefully you guys brought in the new year with a bang. I was extremely busy with work and the holiday season, obviously working at the movies, we all know how that could be. And I am currently fighting a cold. So if I do sound a little deeper with my voice, a little congested, I am fighting a cold. So please just bear with me, but I just didn't really want to leave, you guys hanging too much in the dark, especially if I have the time to, go ahead and record some episodes. So again, the format's going to stay roughly the same. They might not be too long of an episode, maybe like 15, 20 minutes, 25, 30 minutes, somewhere around there. So today we're going to be talking about a movie that has been out for quite a while. It has officially left our theater, as far as I'm concerned. But we're going to be talking about one of the latest installments to the Lord of the Rings franchise, and that is Lord of the Rings, The War of the Rohirrim. So I saw this movie. I absolutely loved it. I thought it was phenomenal. I think if you're a Lord of the Rings fan, you are definitely going to enjoy this film. Obviously, it did not have the biggest box office release, and it's not as critically acclaimed, as any of these other movies, because again, it is an anime, with also a fantasy aspect. So it definitely wasn't going to get the flowers that I think it deserved. Going Going over the box office report, we see that the Lord of the Rings animated film opened up with about a 4.5 million. Hey Google, stop playing music. I don't I don't know why that happened. Um, but we see that it opened with a 4.5 million domestic box office launch and another 2 million internationally. I don't know what the budget for this film was, but I assume that they were probably able to make up their budget. Um, and we could probably dive into a little bit in a second. Overall, so far, it's made about 15 million worldwide, which is not bad. We're going to dive a little bit deeper here and look in Wikipedia. The budget was 30 million, and so far the box office report has it at about 18.4 million. Unfortunately, it has not made its budget back with um, releasing in theaters and the box office, which is a little bit of a shame because, I mean, from what I've heard from Lord of the Ring fans and people that have gone and seen this film, they absolutely loved it. I just, again, I think if you were really the only people that were seeing this film, in all honesty, were probably fans of fantasy or fans of anime, and then also fans of Lord of the Rings. So if you weren't a fan of either of those, you're probably not going to go see this film. So the outreach for this film and the way they kind of like marketed it and stuff like that really didn't grasp like the wider audience, which is why it has such a low um, box office report and why it did not make its budget back. Um, However, besides the shortcomings with the box office revenue and the budget, again, I still think it was a phenomenal film. I absolutely loved it. I mean, I have the IMAX poster for it. I have the regular movie poster for it. I have the popcorn tin and cup that came out with it. I mean, I absolutely loved it. Lord of the Rings is definitely something of a niche for myself. I don't talk about it too much, but I really do love Lord of the Rings and that fantasy aspect, which is great. Um, Now, moving on from the box office, we're going to talk a little bit about the IMDb and the Rotten Tomato scores. So we see that IMDb gave it about a 6.5 out of 10, which is, a pretty decent score. Definitely more of an average score. Um, but however, we see that Rotten Tomatoes gave it a 45%, and it is rotten. Now, we're going to dive a little bit deeper into these Rotten Tomato scores because you know how we feel about Rotten Tomatoes here. Um, it does have a critic score of 45%. However, the popcorn meter has the audience score at about 83%. So we see that this is just kind of a classic, the critics didn't like it, but the audience did like it. Just kind of reading some of these critic reviews real quick, we're going to go with the top one here that this animated deep cut from Lord of the Rings mythos has plenty of spectacle, but its cliched characters and uneven animation resembles middle of the road more than they do Middle Earth. Um, I don't really agree with this at all. Again, some of these critics are doing their jobs and they're just being super critical of everything. But regardless of the scores, whether there are on IMDb or Rotten Tomatoes, overall, this was a pretty good film. I think the IMDb score reflects it a little bit more, as well as the audience score for Rotten Tomatoes at that 83%. I think that goes to show you that people did enjoy it. It was definitely an enjoyable movie. Um, Moving on, I want to kind of talk a little bit about the cast and kind of just give their shout outs to people that deserve it, obviously. So we have Brian Cox playing Helm Hammerhand. We have Miranda Otto actually reprising her role as Eowyn, but more as a voice actor. These are all voice actors, by the way. We have Luke Pasqualino as Wolf. We have Lorraine Ashbourne as Olwyn. Um, Sean Dooley as Freka. We have Yazdan Kwafari as Hama. And then we have Lawrence Ubong Williams as Freylof. And that's pretty much it, to be honest. Really giving their flowers to. We do have Christopher Lee making his voice appearance as Saruman again, which was really nice. Um, and yeah, I mean that is pretty much it. I mean, so overall, you might recognize some faces. If you are a fan of the Lord of the Rings franchise. I mean, we have Dominic Monaghan, reprising a voice acting role as Rot, and he was obviously one of the hobbits in the Lord of the Rings movie. So if you are into voice acting and you know kind of keep an eye out on different voice actors and stuff, you might recognize a couple of the names, which is great. Um, but other than that, is there really anything? Obviously, the content rating was PG-13. It was directed by Kenji Kamiyama, who is also pretty well known. Let's see what else he's been well known for. Um, he definitely is obviously a Japanese writer and director of anime. I'm just trying to get like some of his other projects here so um, we can kind of obviously compare. So he's also known for Eden of the East, which came out in 2009, The Napping Princess, which came out in 2017, and the 009 Re Cyborg that came out in 2012. So he definitely is acclaimed. I think he also did a pretty successful cyberpunk anime that was on Netflix. So he definitely is a credited director as well as writer. And like I said, I think he did a phenomenal job. Just kind of giving you a quick run through of what the plot for this movie was. So this is obviously set 183 years before the events chronicled in the original trilogy of the films. It tells the fate of the House of Helm Hammerhand, the legendary king of Rohan. So I'm assuming if you're like familiar with the Silmarillion and just the overall extensive lore and history of Middle Earth, you will have been familiarized with these characters. A sudden attack by Wolf, a clever and ruthless lord of Rohan, with dubious ancestry, having many ties to Dunlin, seeks vengeance for the death of his father, which forces Helm and his people to try to make a daring last stand in the ancient stronghold of the Hornburg, a mighty fortress that will later come to be known as Helm's Deep. So obviously the movie focuses on Helm's daughter Hera, as she basically kind of takes charge and takes this leadership role in the film to kind of fight back against Wolf and save the people of Rohan. Um, so it is more of a unique story in the sense that obviously it's not focusing on really any of the parts of Middle Earth, that well, I shouldn't say that. I mean, obviously we see the capital of Rohan. We see what is soon to be called Helm's Deep. So we see Isengard. So we do see some locations that we saw in Lord of the Rings. But again, this is taking place almost 200 years before that. So we are seeing a brand new cast of characters with a little bit of familiarity to it, which I think is definitely a good thing, especially if you are like a fan of anime or Lord of the Rings. You kind of have some familiar ties in there already, but it's a whole new cast of characters and just a whole new time period. Um, so moving on from kind of like the plot and just the generic box office stuff, the scores, the cast and crew and whatnot. We're now going to get into the pros and the cons of this movie. So we're gonna go into a couple of the cons first. Again, we take these with a grain of salt. Obviously, I mean, I'm just doing my research here, but we'll take them with a grain of salt, and we'll see if it's actually true or not. So one of the cons that came up was pacing issues. So some viewers felt the movie had a slower pace in certain parts, impacting the overall flow and momentum. I don't really agree with this. I think the movie was pretty well paced, and I think when it became slower, it was for a reason. And I don't think it ruined the overall flow or momentum at all. Obviously, I guess if you are a fan of Lord of the Rings, or maybe just some people prefer a little bit more action than storytelling, but I do not agree with this con at all. I don't think it really had any pacing issues, and I think it was extremely well done. Um, Another con is expectations versus reality. So we got, given the high bar set by previous Lord of the Ring films, some fans had sky high expectations that might have been fully met. Um, Again, we take this with a grain of salt. There probably are those overzealous Lord of the Ring fans that were like super hyped for this film, and they're like, "Oh my God, this is better be the best thing since sliced bread." But in reality, I mean, we all knew that this was going to be a Lord of the Rings film set in a different time period. Obviously, it was a different style. We're not doing live action; we're doing animation. So again, I think you take this with a grain of salt as well. Again, despite what people may think, I thought it was a brilliant film. I love the time period. I love the animation style. Um, so I think it was just overall fantastic. I mean, I thought it was good. So again, depending on how nerdy and how much, how invested you are in Lord of the Rings, you might have been disappointed, depending on, the glamour and, the high bar that, the Peter Jackson film set. But if you're more of a casual fan and you just enjoy a good bit of anime and Lord of the Rings, I think you're going to enjoy this film wholeheartedly. So I wouldn't really put too much emphasis into this. Finally, again, this con, take it with a grain of salt, but obviously we have some less familiar characters. So for those who aren't deep in the lore, the focus is less on familiar characters. Could have made it harder to connect with the story. This one is probably the most like blaringly wrong one out of all the cons. I mean, I think everybody knew that this story was not taking place in the Middle Earth that we all know and love from the Peter Jackson films. We all knew it was set in a different time period. We all knew that it was going to be a whole new cast of characters with a familiar setting. So if you went into this film and you were upset that you didn't see like Aragorn or Frodo or Gandalf, um, you're just kind of kidding yourself because that's not what this film was intended for. And obviously, it wanted to give us a bigger slice of the Middle Earth pie, so to speak. Um, and I think they did that really well, especially focusing on something that is so familiar, such as Rohan. Kind of giving us a deeper dive into their lore and history, and you know, uh, giving us again like another story, another slice of Middle Earth. Um, again, all these cons you definitely could take with a grain of salt. These are probably just some like little bickering issues that people probably have had, because they have nothing better to do. But again, the pacing issues, the expectation versus reality, and the less familiar characters, you all take with a grain of salt. Because I personally don't think that any of these cons were really in the film. And it's obviously up to everybody's own personal judgment. Um, so ending this off, we're gonna discuss some of the pros that were obviously in this film. So one of the pros is the epic scale and action. So as a tale rooted in the lore of the Rohirrim, the film offered grand scale battles and impressive visuals that rivaled those of the original trilogy. I did think that they did the animation extremely well in the battle scenes that they had. Some of the battle scenes gave me chills. I mean, even like them lining up in a typical Rohirrim style. About to make their infamous cavalry charge. Hearing the horns blare, hearing the men cheering and shouting, definitely gave me goosebumps and made me think back to the Peter Jackson films, especially in the Two Towers, as well as Return of the King. Just kind of, it might have not had the same grandeur, as those Rohirrim charges, but both charges and the combat that was in this movie, was definitely visually appealing, and it was, I thought it was done really well. Um, Obviously, another pro, again, we kind of talked about this a little bit with one of the cons, is a little bit more lore expansion. So, obviously, it delved into the rich history of Rohan and its legendary figures, giving fans more depth and context to appreciate. So, again, if you didn't sit there and you didn't like read the Silmarillion and you don't know all the lore, of Middle Earth, this gave Lord of the Rings fans a dive into, again, an area that we all know and well, which is Rohan. But it gave us a little bit more depth. It showed us a time period where the kingdom was probably at their highest, and then obviously their lowest, and more of like a transitional period in Rohan's history, ending one line of kings and starting another. Plus, also setting the groundwork and some of the seeds for some of the figures that we see in the Peter Jackson films, such as Saruman, becoming the new master of Isengard. So again, I think the deep lore expansion was definitely good for this, and I think depending on how successful they think this film was, this is a good avenue to start exploring other opportunities and other historical points in the Lord of the Rings franchise, by diving into like animation and development like this. So I think it was phenomenal. Another point we have is obviously character development. So, mostly this film does focus on Hera. So we see an emotional and intricate character journey that resonates with audiences. So we see how she's kind of like this odd girl out. She's kind of like more wild and chaotic. Being raised by someone like Helm Hammerhand, obviously more of a militaristic, and riding approach to her upbringing versus like the probably more traditional like approach of raising a girl. She is not a princess that you would probably all think she was. um and it's interesting to see her take on more of this authoritative role, as some members of her family, unfortunately either fall in battle or die. And, we see her, like, kind of as like the sole survivor, basically trying to rescue, the people of Rohan, and to try to bring them all together, to defeat Wolf. So I think her journey is an interesting one. I mean, we see her at her highs, we see her at her lows, and then overall, we see that at the end of the film, she continues to stay true to who she is. And we see that obviously her journey has not ended, as the ending of the film has her going on another adventure. So that is definitely very Hera. And again, you definitely fell in love with these characters. Even some of her brothers, her father especially, even some that we haven't seen too much of, especially someone like Wolf, seeing how he started to how he got that way, and then his end. The development and the characteristics of all these characters, I think, was really well done, and it definitely um had you more heavily invested in them. And I think that's where that, like, slowing down of the story a little bit, so it might have been like go go go, like action packed, and then it kind of slows down a little bit, but it allows you get to know the characters a little bit more, get to know the lore, and their development and their character arcs, and I think that makes it for a really enjoyable film. Excuse me. Finally, we have the visual and the sound design. So the movie maintained the high standards of stunning visuals as a evocative musical score, immersing viewers in the world of Middle Earth. So when I saw this movie the first time, I saw it in 4DX. I thought it was absolutely phenomenal. If you ever have a chance to go see a movie in 4DX, go see it, because it definitely made this film so much more immersive. However, I saw it a second time and I saw it in Dolby. And I think having that extra visual and sound design on top of a Dolby experience, I think was amazing. The musical score was phenomenal. Again, all the sounds and the visuals, I think, were absolutely stunning. Again, at first I was like, I don't know if this is my type of animation style, but after watching it like twice, I was like, this is really good. I was like, I really enjoy this animation style. Um, so yeah, I mean, but in a nutshell, I mean, I think if you're looking for pros to take away from this movie, it was an epic scale, and it had a lot of action in it. Obviously, there was a deep lore expansion into Rohan, and just kind of going away from the War of the Rings, that we know, with Middle Earth and the Peter Jackson films. We have a lot of good character development and character arcs and characteristics in this film. And finally, the visual and the sound design, I think, was top notch. And it definitely made the experience come more alive. Um, so I think in total, if I had to sit here and I had to give it a score, I don't know what we could do instead of Suns, out of 10. It is a nerd corner, but you know what? Because it is Lord of the Rings, how about we rate it out of rings? So I think I would give this film a solid 10 out of 10 rings. I mean, for the first review of 2025, might as well start off with a banger. I thought it was phenomenal. I didn't really have any problems with it personally. Again, I thought a big driving force of my love for it was kind of falling in love with the characters. As a historian, learning more about fantasy history, and learning about the history and the time periods of the fantasy and the sci-fi that I love, as a historian, just like really boosts my enjoyability of the franchise. So, I mean, not only falling in love with the characters, but learning more about the lore and the history of Middle Earth, just as well as just appreciating all the animation and the sound and the design. It was absolutely phenomenal. It was a great experience. I really hope if anybody was able to go see it, they had the same experience that I had. But at the end of the day, like I said, I would give this film a solid 10 out of 10 rings. If it's still in your local theater, I highly suggest go seeing it. It was absolutely phenomenal. If it is not, find a way to either stream it, and watch it if you are a Lord of the Rings fan, if you are a fantasy fan, even if you're just an anime fan, and you want to try something new. Definitely take a look at this film. I cannot recommend this enough. And with that being said, that is going to do it for today's episode, where we dove into Lord of the Rings, War of the Rohirrim. So again, I would give it a solid 10 out of 10. Definitely go check this film out if you can, in theaters or streaming, if it is out on streaming yet. Even if you use, like, Blu-ray or CD still, or DVDs, definitely go check this film out. I don't think you will be disappointed. But with that being said, thank you guys for coming out. Sorry. Thank you guys so much for coming out to another wonderful episode of the Nerd Corner. I hope you guys really enjoyed it. Hope you guys enjoy the name change and the profile change. And hopefully we could all bring in 2025 on a better and a more positive note. Obviously, I'm still struggling with a cold, so it might have not been the best start of the new year for me, but it's only 3 days in, so hopefully it's just up from here. But until I see you guys again, thank you so much for tuning in. Please follow us or please follow me on our socials on Instagram and TikTok at the Nerd Corner. You might just have to add a couple R's because apparently the Nerd Corner was already taken. But you can find us on YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok at the Nerd Corner, where I will post either clips or pictures of the movies that I'm talking about and the TV shows that I'm talking about, to let you know that, oh, hey, this episode is out. You should go watch it. But with that being said, thank you guys for coming out to another wonderful episode. Until I see you again, I hope you guys have a great start to the new year. You've enjoyed it with friends and family, and you are following those resolutions to a T. But with that being said, I hope you guys have a great morning, great afternoon, great evening. Please be safe. Do not do anything stupid. And I will see you all in the next one. Goodbye for now.